Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During all of the committee's analysis of what occurred, we've come back again and again to a couple of thoughts which you've expressed again today, and that is that there are vast powers of collection out there, and hopefully we will do better with analysis. But I'm hopeful, and there's no way you can answer this question definitively, that in the course of all of our discussion, that we have computer power or some additional abilities to parse this huge mass of collection. I'm impressed, as I'm certain you are, with how much somebody has listened and heard somewhere, and how difficult it is to find for the policymaker or for the analyst, maybe prior to that time, what of all of this has any relevance whatsoever. I just think technically we need fixes here. I hope that there are genius levels in America that are providing this, and maybe you can offer some assurance of progress. The second thought is, even if we do, it has to be translated. The language skills that are required to deal with all of the things we're now talking about simply aren't there. This is a crash program that has to happen. I hope is occurring. I'm not sure I've seen evidence that gives confidence levels there. So that if we did have the nuggets, we get it in at least a language we can understand and get it to the analysts. Now, having said all of that, what you've said today is interesting, that the synthesis of all of this, the desire for consensus, may lead to the policymaker finally getting something that doesn't have the dissent, or even on a Supreme Court decision, there are dissenting justices. My guess is that probably we would better serve if there are at this point too. We don't want to confuse the President or the Secretary of State or Defense, but on the other hand, having several different points of view that can be weighed at this point, I think would be of the essence. And let me just conclude at least the statement preceding your questions or comments by saying that we have also been discussing in this committee, but outside of this committee, this whole business of preemption. Now, preemption in the sense of new FBI powers, the idea that something other than prosecuting the case, but going after the malefactors. I don't want to veer off into the Iraq issue because that's something else, but clearly that is being talked about with regard to Iraq and other threats of that variety. This is something that is very new, or at least new in terms of a big public policy issue of how we do this in a free society and in a world of nations that also have rights. But clearly of the essence, if what we're talking about today is to happen, that we have to have the ability to be on the offensive, to pounce upon it. Now, these are big issues that I hope these hearings and these reports will get to, because clearly whatever we found with the deficiencies prior to September the 11th, the things we're talking about now are huge in terms of having any hope, at least in the world subsequently. I queried Secretary Wolfowitz as to this Defense Department move on Undersecretary of Defense, and you've suggested, Mr. Armitage, that maybe state ought to have that too. I don't know. Maybe you need that in order to consolidate within the departments. But somehow or other, Secretary or Mr. Tenet or somebody has to be in charge, it seems to me, of intelligence. There's been old saw in intelligence a long time, and I'm not certain it's getting worked out. It may be more complex. Either of you have any comments about all of this within the period of time that I have allotted?
Thank you, Senator. There's something seriously out of sync when you have policymakers who, even good friends like Paul and I, who can disagree almost violently without being disagreeable, I think, on policy issues as we discuss them, and yet it doesn't seem to be the case in the intelligence community that that kind of disagreement is allowed to flourish. So there's something out of sync. The meetings in front of the president, it's not a state secret that he welcomes different views. He requires them to make the right decision. I think we need it too. I can't give you any satisfaction on the other question of the interconnectivity of our information and all of that. We're dealing with a Department of State who, thanks to the goodness of Congress for the last 2 years, is finally coming into the 1980s. We almost have all of our posts wired for email, not to mention secure.
of the technical revolution, just of the essence in state. Go out in the field. It's so necessary.
Senator, I think one of the real lessons, and it's not just with respect to terrorism, is we now have technological capacities that allow us to have a pull system for intelligence rather than a push. And let me take an example that's not in the terrorism area. When it comes to satellite photography, our traditional way of doing it is the photo interpreters at a central location pore over it, they figure out what's really good, and they distribute to a user. We now have capacity to distribute stuff that a user out in the field, who may not be the world's best photo interpreter, but he knows that it's a guy shooting at him from over the hill that he needs a photograph of, can pull it out, and the data can distribute it. And we need more of that. And that, by the way, is the opposite of this tendency, which is every problem is going to be solved by centralizing. I think on the whole, we get huge advantages from more decentralization. The other point is, I hope that people understand, no matter how good our intelligence gets, and obviously it could be improved, and obviously we can identify things that could have been done better, it will never be good enough that we can simply wait and head off every attack when it's imminent. We've got to act preventively, and that isn't only by military means or even only by intelligence means, but we can no longer say that it's somehow acceptable. Maybe acceptable was never quite the right word, but that countries sponsor terrorism and we put them on the terrorism list and we don't sell them Boeing aircraft, and that's good enough. I think we've seen on September 11th a glimpse of how terrible the world will be when those kinds of capabilities are magnified by weapons of mass destruction. And I think what we came to somehow live with over the last 20 years, we can't live with anymore. And no matter how good our intelligence is, we will not be able to live with it.